Okay, we're ready to start. We're on the closing chapter, not the chapter, but the closing of the book. We are, I'll remind you that the enemies of the Lamb were introduced, Babylon, the beast, in that order. Then, when judgment, God's judgment comes upon those entities, it's reverse order. Babylon is the first one that fell. And remember, Babylon represents the seductiveness of the world. What old-time preachers, when I was growing up, called worldliness, except their idea of worldliness was not the biblical idea of worldliness, because many of them were just as worldly as they could be. Ambitious, controlling, that kind of thing, which is the most deadly of the seductions of the world. The idea of being in charge and in control is just as demonic as it can be, especially when that's taken into churches, congregations. And I have, as a counselor, I have helped kind of heal people who had been victims of what religious sociologists call toxic religion. It's religion where the people would use religious tools and authority to control other people. And it's very seductive and very destructive. We had an elder couple here that I'm not going to mention any names because I learned about all this, and they had come from another church in San Antonio where they were just almost spiritually and emotionally destroyed by the toxic religion approach. And so that's Babylon. That's what is destructive and seductive about the world. Babylon went first, and we saw a chapter or two devoted to the destruction of Babylon, because Babylon was also a symbol of Rome, and Rome was the epitome of that. The epitome of, and even Roman ethicists and Roman philosophers were critical of Rome because of the effect it had on twisting and warping people spiritually. You want to get somebody that they go read Cicero, or I find it extremely difficult to call him Cicero, because I was taught classic Latin, and it's Cicero. And
Caesar would have been Kaiser.
Yeah, Kaiser. Yeah. And that's the reason that some of the Germanic languages have Kaisers and Kaisers. Tsar is the Russian equivalent of that. Okay, so then we're down now. The chapter 20 has to do with the defeat of Satan and his final destruction. And we come down to this 11th verse in chapter 20. Then I saw a great white throne and the one sitting on it. He was so awesome that earth and sky fled away from his presence and completely disappeared. Now, this doesn't mean physical disappearance of the world. It is a way of stating when he who is on the throne, the Father God, when he is there, he is in control of everything. It is the idea of his absolute superiority and control over the world. Then I saw all the dead, both great and small, standing before the throne. Some books were lying open, and another book was opened. Now, visualize this. Here is the great white throne. You can't see who is sitting on the throne because we're going to see God as he is, but that doesn't come until the new heaven and the new earth. And that's something to notice, the change from that.
So you're saying we assume that's the Father is on the throne?
Yes.
Or Jesus?
Well, they are both on the throne. That's been true since the 4th, 5th, and 6th chapters, way back at the beginning of the book. And so here I think it means the Father. If you want me to prove that, I can't. But what is said about the creation fleeing away from him and control, I think is. It was the book of life. Now, what do you think the book of life is?
The names of all the saints.
The name of all the saints. Okay.
The name of the registry or of the saint?
That have died, that have already passed away.
Anybody else?
I think book of life is, how would I say this? Anything that has to do with this creation, everything that happens.
Okay. I think it's all of the above. All of the above. What it is, it's a record of the behavior of people who have been made right by the blood of Christ. Now, I've carefully selected mine. That is a description of what is usually called justified. But justification has gotten a whole amount of baggage that I like to just cut away and say, made right by God. It is God who makes us right. And that effectively means it's people whose verdict is already in. Now that, I want you to get that. That means that those who have believed in Christ and been incorporated into his body they know what the verdict is going to be from the judgment in front of the great white throne. This is something I like to emphasize because there's a lot of believers that just worry themselves spiritually ill by the idea that they're going to have to give an answer for everything they've done in this body. But it is the clear teaching. Again and again, Paul says that in Romans and other places. But the thing is, our verdict has already been guaranteed. Now that's the thing. And it's based upon our faith in the Lord Jesus Christ and his work on the cross. So, this is the book of the life. The dead were judged by what they had done as recorded in the books. Now, some of the books had to do with your behavior. Some of them had to do with the fact you had been declared innocent. That's the book of life. Okay.
One question.
Okay.
Since the verdict has already been declared, so therefore you cannot be erased from the book of life?
No. That's one way to put it. One of the things that there is a balance in the New Testament between assurance and possibility. I mean, you're always open and you're living, but if you know that the verdict is in, that is a motivation for living better. See, if you think, and there's a lot of people this way that think, okay, I'm a Christian. I remember when I was 12 years old and was baptized, I was just so happy and all until I committed my first sin. Conscious sin. I'd probably sinned several times and wasn't even aware of it. And I felt totally devastated by it. Well, it wasn't many years later until I realized the genuine teaching about what the grace of God really means. And see, all right, what do you do when you're in that condition? You come to God and you say, forgive me. And as John says in the book of 1 John, he is faithful and just to forgive us when we confess that we're sin. And that is a process. Now, hopefully, we will get better and better, but only hopefully, because it's very possible that we'll go into a kind of spiritual doldrums sometimes due to external circumstances, due to a lot of things, and we're not getting any better. And Satan is always there, ready to snatch the word from you when that happens. Remember, like Job, you have to go to the Father, God. He's the only source of forgiveness. He's also your judge, but he's also the only source of forgiveness. So what do? You keep going to him.
Amen.
You keep constantly going to him. And I think that's probably what the 7th chapter of Romans is all about. Is that experience we have of realizing we've done bad and going to God with it and keep that up.
And all of us can't even help ourselves.
What?
And can't even help ourselves.
That's right.
I just had a quick question. Does it mean anything? It says some books were lying open and another book was open. It was the book of life. So what were the other books?
I think the historical record of people's lives.
You need more than one book for that?
Yes.
Okay.
How many? Right now there's what, 7.5? Some maybe 7.6 billion people on Earth. And when you count all the human beings who's ever been, remember, this is just symbolic. It is just that the books are sufficient Think of it that way. I don't know how many books there were, but it was sufficient for the purposes of judging. Does that make sense to you?
But Javier is kind of he likes those timelines. And whenever it's talking here, I see the dead, both great and small.
Mm-hmm.
That is, it's not going to be erased.
What do you
That's
mean?
after we have died, the first death, right?
Uh, This is after the first death. This is resurrection. This is after the general resurrection. That's when judgment comes. First comes judgment, and then the resurrection, and then judgment. Okay. The sea gave up its dead, as did the unseen, as did death and the unseen world. Now, I took the capitals out of unseen world. That is a translation of the word Hades. Hades in Greek means the unseen, what's not seen. This is probably equivalent to what the Old Testament called Sheol, the place of the dead. It just means the unseen place. Don't go creating a geography with maps and all. When I was younger, I had this beautiful sermon where I took plastic tape of different colors and put them on a bed sheet and would hold it up, and I could tell you exactly minute by minute where everybody was going to be. The only problem was that my details exceeded biblical facts, which I find that a lot of sermons like that do. It is very tempting to take just a few hints and build an anvil of conclusion on a horsehair of biblical fact. And I've become much more, I think, wise, spiritually wise. And it's so much easier for me to say, I don't know, than it used to be. Okay. Each of them was judged according to what they had done. How else would we be judged? Now, Paul has something that bears on this, I think, when he's talking about in 1 Corinthians 3, when he's talking about building on the foundation of somebody else's work. And he says that that will be tested as by fire. And if what you built is solid gold or stone or something, well and good, you will receive a reward for that. Notice, but he says, if not, you will be saved anyway, even if it's by fire. That is, we need to assure ourselves that God's grace is greater than our sin. And start with that and make everything conform to that idea. So we have that judgment in our favor. And I have found that contrary to what human psychology thinks, people are a whole lot more apt to respond positively to love and forgiveness than they are to terror and pain. It is the devil's fallacy that the way to get people to straighten up is to threaten them with punishment. It just doesn't work that way. Okay. Death and the unseen world were thrown into the lake of fire. Now, what passages of Scripture does that little sentence remind you of? There's a standard teaching in the New Testament. Steve?
Drawing a blank.
Well, look at it again. Death and Hades, or the unseen world, were thrown into the fire. What is the last enemy that Christ must conquer? Death. And see, this is the last enemy. And that's what John wants us to understand. The plan of God is being put into effect. The kingdom is working. God's plan is working, and this is the last step in it. Death, be not proud, the poet said. So, death is the final enemy, and that leaves the Christ, the Lamb, victorious. And what is the Lamb going to do? Going to return what?
Yeah, he's going to return, he's going to be coming back.
Yeah, he's going to return the dominion, the rule, back to the Father. His work is finished. We talk about the last saying on the cross, it is finished. Okay, but it was only finished in prospect. Here is the picture of it being completely finished in time. Now see, this is still in time, even though we're not getting into the new heaven and the new earth yet. We're going to, but this isn't it. So he says, death and the unseen world were thrown into the lake of fire. The lake of fire is the second death. That is, it's final. No one comes back from that. And we talked a little bit last time about the reason that the ancients thought about a lake of burning sulfur was that was one of the hottest fires that they were acquainted with on a regular basis. Now, we know that volcanoes have hotter fire than that, and I'm sure that many of them did, but it wasn't a common human experience. The hottest thing that the average person knew was a fire of burning sulfur. And so it was a suitable symbol of that final destruction. If anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, they were thrown into the lake of fire. Now, we've talked about the book of life. That defines it negatively. If their name was not in the book of life, sometimes called the Lamb's book of life, then they were thrown into the fire. But that means what? That those whose names were there were not thrown into the lake of fire. Mike, you...
I was going to say, last time when we were going through this, both Jesse and I got mixed up a little bit. You were talking about how in the defeat of Satan takes place before the great white throne of judgment. He was loosed from his imprisonment for a while, and then he was able to go out and deceive the nations at every corner of the earth. Okay, and then he was put into the lake of fire, and then it said something about it seemed like it was him being put in the lake of fire, and then the other counterpart to him being put in the lake of fire. And now here at the end it says anyone whose name is not. So is that a progression of events?
I don't think so. I think it's all meant to happen as a result of the judgment in the front of the great white throne.
Okay, because both Jesse and I were confused over
Okay.
that. And I remember talking to you about it.
Well, I didn't understand exactly, but yes, no, I think this is contemporaneous. That means at the same time.
Right, okay.
See, when you are describing things that happen, you cannot describe something that's simultaneous. You describe one thing and then you describe another. But I think the idea is that all of this happens as a result of the judgment passed in front of the great white throne. Does that make...
Yeah, that does.
Okay. And again, remember, we're dealing with a description of things that John saw. And you cannot describe things that are happening simultaneous. It just can't be done. Or if you could, nobody could understand you. It'd be like these Mongolian nose flute players that can play harmony, two different tones at the same time and harmonize with themselves. And I've heard it, but I don't know how they do it. I can't even harmonize with anybody else, much less with myself. Okay, anything else? All right, there we are. Now, there is that's the end of time. That's when, at this point, when Satan is finally thrown into the lake of fire. Death and Hades have been thrown into the lake of fire. And the last enemy, death, is put down. Now,
Can I
What?
throw a question out here?
okay,
Before at the Great White Throne Judgment, it specifically mentions that all the dead will be there.
mm-hmm.
I don't see any mention of people that might have survived the final battle.
Actually, the people that will be there have all died by this time and are raised. This is kind of, I think, what Jesus describes in, where is it, in John 5, where he talks about there will be a resurrection unto life and a resurrection unto destruction. Now, I hold on to that word destruction. Mike, you know what, whatever I'm coming from there. Seems to me that people will be finally annihilated. Now, I know that that's a controversial subject in modern theological discussion, but the more and older I get, the more I'm inclined to think that that's what the New Testament teaches. Okay, now we come to the last part, chapters 21 and 22. And it starts out by saying, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth." I remember the first time that I ever really noticed this, and it was in the early 1970s. And like any young preacher, of course I was 43, 44 years old, but I was still young. And I had to tell people about it. And I got blank stares. They just never heard of it. We have this idea, and it goes back to probably Neoplatonic influences among the early church theologians, that we will go to heaven. There is not any statement in the New Testament that says that. I know, I've searched and searched and searched for it, and it's not there. And we have this statement that there will be a new heaven and a new earth, and instead of us going to where God is, God will come to where we are. And that's an entirely, it's difficult to describe how radical a change that is in attitude. God has always come to man. Who was it that came down in the cool of the evening to visit with Adam and Eve? God. God always comes down. Who came to Moses? Yahweh came to Moses. Who was it spoke to Elijah or Elisha? Who was it spoke to Jonah? See, every case you have in the whole Bible, God comes to man. There's a kind of spiritual pride that I think is at work in this idea of us bringing God down. You know, Paul just flat says, that's wrong. You can't go and bring God down, because he's already as close as this, to use Job's phrase, on the skin on your teeth. Okay, so this is what is going to happen. God is going to make a new heaven and a new earth. Now, there's no use speculating what that is going to mean, because we would have to know what the first heaven and the first earth was like before sin entered it. And I'm not that old, are you? And there's not any real description of it. People will, you know, they'll make all kinds of speculations and all, but we just don't know. This is a promise, and it's a promise that's very satisfactory. My God will not allow evil to win. And that's what he's going to do. He's going to make a new heaven and a new earth where evil is impossible. Now, in my book, I raised the question, what guarantee do we have that evil won't come back into this new creation like it did the first creation? Anybody want to make a stab at answering that?
The tree of the knowledge of good and evil will be gone, right?
Well, that's not
The answer, okay.
God's presence.
what?
God's presence.
No, God was present. What has happened?
No,
It's a promise.
Satan's destroyed.
What?
Satan's
been
destroyed.
It's a promise.
Well, that's a good one. You're on the right track. Christ has come into the world. The incarnation. Remember, I said that it is finished is not true until death and Hades are thrown into the pit. Then his work is finished. And that means that evil cannot come back. That includes Satan's being destroyed. Okay? But the work, what I want you to do is, this is the work of Christ brought to its fruition. And evil would have to come through him. And it can't. Isn't that a beautiful idea?
Isn't Satan gone for 1,000 years?
What?
Isn't Satan gone for 1,000 years
Well, he's going to be gone forever at this time.
at this time?
Yeah, see, we've gone past his destruction, the past 1,000 years. Time is no more here. See,
Let me be a devil's advocate here.
okay,
Before creation, the Trinity was present.
I hate to answer that.
Wasn't it?
I think so.
Okay.
Now,
Now, we saw the fall of Satan, was an angel, okay?
now, but when did that happen?
That's where I'm trying to get at.
Okay, that happened due to the work of Christ on the cross. That's a teaching that is not emphasized enough, is the cosmic work of Christ. You need to study Colossians and Ephesians and Paul's teaching about triumphing over principalities and powers in the heavenly places. This happened due to the work of Christ. Satan was bound. Then he was released for a short period of time. And I don't know how long, but just relatively short period of time. Now, we are to the point where Satan has been totally demolished, annihilated, no longer exists. And the new heaven and the new earth is here. Listen to that statement. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. I'm trying to really get you to realize what a radical statement that is. We don't have anything to compare it to. We've never seen a world where there was no evil and could not be evil.
Charles, before I forget, I'm still at the end of chapter 20, I'm sorry. A question that my brother made over here, basically if there was going to be anybody alive. Thessalonians 4:17 says, after that, we who are still alive and are left will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And so we will be with the Lord forever.
Okay, that does not go into the detail that you have in the book of Revelation. That's a kind of summary statement, and nothing I've said here contradicts that. See, this is the way that you get there to be judged in front of the great white throne. That is resurrection. He's talking about resurrection. People that are still alive will be changed in the twinkling of an eye, and then those, yeah, and see?
I didn't understand. I thought that you had said that everybody was going to be, nobody alive.
Yeah,
Just,
yes, see?
okay.
They'll either die or they will be changed.
All right.
That's the way they got in front of the great white throne. Let's put it that way. That might help you to think about it. Okay. The first heaven and the first earth had disappeared, and the sea no longer existed. Now, that is a good Jewish view of things. The sea, the word in Hebrew for sea is the Tiamat, the Babylonian goddess of creation. And they saw the sea as chaos. That's what they got out of the creation story about the Spirit of God brooded over the sea. The word is deep in Genesis. And brooded there doesn't mean, feeling sad or are bad or something like we talk. The fellow's brooding, he's worried or concerned. It means like a brooding hen. The Spirit of God hovered over the sea and brought life to the sea out of the chaos of the sea. That's good Jewish teaching, Jewish idea. Okay. I also saw the city of God coming down out of heaven. Now, it says he here. I was talking to Steve just before class, and I didn't know exactly what preposition to use. You could use the feminine pronoun. I said preposition, pronoun. You can say she was prepared like a bride. And that would be fairly natural when you were thinking in terms of being a bride. But on further mature consideration, I decided to go with the modern American idea of calling cities its. So I used it in my final translation of this passage. It was prepared like a bride adorned for her husband. Now, remember, we've already had the marriage feast of the Lamb and the feast of God, which is ironic because it was dead people, birds gorged on the dead people that were killed in the last battle, Armageddon. Okay. Then I heard a voice coming from the throne. It said, "Now God's dwelling place is among human beings, and he will live among them." Now notice, this is the fruition of God's plan. Remember when he made a covenant with Abraham and a covenant with the Jews that they will be my people and I will be their God? Okay, this was the process of God's governance through history. And the Jews failed God. They didn't keep their covenant. But now, there can be no failure. See? Satan is dead. Evil has been destroyed. This is a new heaven and a new earth protected by the finished work of the Messiah. And we're going to see how that works out in a picture. They will be his people, and God himself will live among them and be their God. Now, notice how personal this is. He will wipe the tears from their eyes. Death will no longer exist, nor will grief, weeping, or pain, because the previous things will have disappeared. These things cannot exist. It is so sublimely beautiful that I can spend hours thinking about it and have. And it's maybe a good thing for you to meditate on sometime, is to read these descriptions and think of all the times you've wept because of grief. All the time you have wept because of physical pain. All the times you have wept because somebody betrayed you. And these things cannot be there. They will not be there. As I say, the hardest thing for human beings to do is to portray good. Have you ever thought about that? Some of the greatest literary creations are descriptions of bad people. But we don't have any good literature about being good. You know why?
Because we can't slay.
What?
We don't know what it looks like.
That's exactly right. Who would we model it after? Well, we've got one model. But if you tried to model a human being like Jesus, guess what you would end up with? Jesus. He's the only model for what it means to be good. And what did the world do to him? It killed him. See, that, no pain nor weeping. Then the one sitting on the throne said, observe, I am making everything new. Now, this is, in all probability, God the Father speaking, because He is the Creator God, even though He created through, far, by, and with the Word and the Son. He also said, write this because these words are true and are to be trusted. That's what I'm trying to get you to do, is trust these words so that you can use them to motivate yourself. You can use them to help you live better. Use them when you are near to despair, when things are just going all awry. That they're faithful. They're to be trusted. They can be. They're true. He then said to me, it is finished. I began everything, and I brought everything to its intended end. This is what God had in mind before He created. This is what He wanted His first creation to be. Now, when I get there, I'm treading on delicate ground, because I have to extrapolate things that I think are true, but I couldn't prove them, okay? But I think that's what he's talking about. This is what I intended to begin with. When He made us in His image, He made us to live in His presence. He made us to live in harmony with each other and in harmony with Him.
So would you say that it ends back to how it started?
Yes, I think I can't remember whether you were here or not when I did. The first Bible class that I took at Abilene Christian, it was Abilene Christian College then in 1950, was by a fellow who was, he didn't know any Greek, didn't know any Hebrew, but he knew the English Bible. He knew it as a child would know its primer. And I remember one of the first things he told us was that the Bible opens with God and man in a garden together. And the Bible closes with God and man in a garden together. And he says, everything in between is what God had to do to bring that back to where He wanted it. And that is as good a summary of the Bible as you can get in just a sentence or two. And so, that's what he's saying. I will give free water to all thirsty people from the spring of the water of life. Now here is the water of life. The victor, this should not be victory, it's the victor, the winner, the one who wins, will inherit all these things. I will be their God, and they will be my child. However, those who are cowards, who refuse to believe, who do detestable things, who sin sexually, who practice witchcraft, who worship idols or tell lies, will have their place in the lake of burning sulfur. This is the second death. In other words, in retrospect, he's saying none of these things exist anymore. They've been put out. Then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls of the last plagues approached me and said, "Come, and I will show you the bride, who is the wife of the Lamb." He then carried me in the Spirit to a great high mountain. From there he showed me the city of God, Jerusalem. It was coming down out of heaven from God. It was shining with the radiance of God's presence. Its brilliance was like that of a precious jewel, like jasper. It was clear like a diamond. Now, the best representation of this that I've ever seen was when Dorothy and her companions first saw the Emerald City. And that, I think that probably the people that did that had this kind of an idea in mind. The city is unbelievably beautiful, and John, he's not all that much a poet, but he is in awe of what he saw. He said, it was surrounded by a massive high wall. The wall had 12 gates. 12 angels stood at the gates. On the gates were inscribed the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. 3 of the gates faced east, 3 faced north, 3 gates faced south, and 3 faced west. The wall rested on 12 foundation stones. On them were inscribed the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. Then the angel who was speaking to me was holding a golden measuring rod to measure the city. Now, to measure the city is to show its limits. Only here it is to show that the limits exceed all reasonable expectations. He goes ahead to say, the city was laid out in the form of a square, with its length and breadth equal. He measured the city. It measured about 1,400 miles. Now, 1,400 miles. That's a pretty good city wall, isn't it? It was 4 square. The old hymn that says the city 4 square, based on King James translation of this material. Its length, breadth, and height were the same. Then he measured the wall. It was about 14 miles high, as human beings measure things, which is what the angel was doing. The material out of which the wall was made was jasper. The city itself was made of pure gold, which was as clear as glass. Now, I defy you to visualize that.
Wow. High wall.
Yes, but imagine, now, one of the things that I wanted to bring out here, and I'm going to give you a little preview of next week also, it mentions a great street running through the city. And what none of the commentaries I've ever read mention, because when most of them were written, it was before this had been discovered as part of the archaeology of Jerusalem. And when we were there in 70 and sometime in between, and then when we went back in 1990, it had been discovered. And there was a main avenue running from the east to the west, a broad street made like a boulevard, you know, with spaces between the two, running from the east walls of Jerusalem all the way to the west wall. And it ran the entire length of the city. And I cannot help but think that's what, because you will find people commenting on this, they say, well, we don't know what they meant by just the city of the street of the city. But knowing what I knew, it made really good sense that John would have known this. He was there when it was all open. And I've seen the Cardo, and it runs, it's a wide street, kind of like some of the boulevards of Paris, as big as they are. Okay. The city itself, the foundation of the city wall, the foundations, plural, of the city wall were decorated with all kinds of precious stones. The first foundation was jasper, the second sapphire, the third chalcedony, the fourth emerald, the fifth sardonyx, the sixth carnelian, the seventh chrysolite, the eighth beryl, the ninth topaz, the 10th chrysoprase, the 11th jacinth, the 12th amethyst. The 12 gates were 12 pearls. Each gate was a single pearl. This is what I'm talking about. The wide street of the city was made of pure gold, which was as transparent as glass. I did not see a sanctuary in it. The Lord God Almighty and the Lamb were its sanctuary. The city didn't need either the sun or the moon to give it light, because God's radiance illuminates it, and the Lamb is its lamp. The people of the world will walk about in its light. Now, this is one of the strange little notes here, and it's exactly what it says. The people of the world. Now, that means all kinds of people. That means every race, color, tribe, nation. That's what it means. The people of the world, not worldly people, but all kinds of people will be there. And the kings of earth will bring their splendor into it. It will be like all royal cities, only more so. This is John stretching his knowledge of language to its uttermost to emphasize the glorious radiance of this city. Its gates will not be closed because it is never night there. All the greatness and glory of the earth will enter into it. However, nothing unclean will ever enter it. No one who does evil things or who lies will enter. The only people who will enter are the ones whose names are written in the Lamb's Book of Life. I hope that I've been... Yes?
No one will be sleeping then.
No. You don't need to sleep.
Don't sleep, brother.
So it seems like we're going to be busy
Yes.
doing something.
Doing something. Yes. Now, you can make all kinds of speculations, and I've done this. To me, and I want you to realize that this is what appeals to me, since I like to learn things, I can visualize an eternity of learning whatever about God's creation you want to know. And that would be nice.
I didn't mean to interrupt you.
It's okay.
I just had a question on verse 24. It says, the nations will walk by its light, and the kings of the earth will bring their splendor into it. Kings of the earth.
Yeah.
Who are they?
Well, this is just a generalization. It will be as splendorous as all the royal cities that the world's ever known. You see, that's, it's not that it will have kings,
It's just trying to get us to
the splendor. The word, I think the word here is shining, illuminated, glowing. It has its own light. And as you say, you won't want to sleep. But see, the reason we sleep is our bodies grow tired and weary. And I always think of the 40th chapter of Isaiah, that the people of God will mount up like eagles. Yeah. And so, actually, the idea of the new heaven and the new earth is first mentioned in Isaiah. And this is a description from that. Okay.
No concept of time then.
What? No, that's right. No concept of time. Very good. You got that point.